Welcome to the final conference of Biorefinery Glas. I'd like to welcome everyone to this. So over the last 2 years, the Department of Agriculture funded EIP Agri Biorefinery Glas project, demonstrated small-scale green biofarmers in Ireland producing and trialling a range of different products from grass. This event will explore the potential of new products produced from grass and the broader role that green biorefineries could play in helping Irish agriculture to become more resilient and sustainable. So we have many great speakers today, and this session is broken down into 3 sessions. The first session is chaired by Enda Buckley of Carbery on green biorefinery concepts. Bridget Lynch is chairing the second session on biorefinery glass product analysis results. And the third session is chaired by Helena McMahon on business models, finance, policy recommendations, and knowledge exchange. And the roundup of the main project findings by James Gaffey. Some practicalities for this webinar. Only presenters' cameras and microphones are on, so you're muted. So please put your questions and comments in the chat. You can find this at the bottom panel, and the speakers will answer the questions in the chat. You can type your answers in the right panel. And some questions will be taken also at the end of each session. So please note as well, this webinar is recorded. Thank you. So we'll move directly into the first session, chaired by Enda Buckley. Enda is Director of Sustainability at Carbery, and he will chair session 1 on green biorefinery concepts. So thank you.
Thanks, Emily. So good morning, everyone. You are very welcome to the first session of the Biorefinery Glass workshop. In this first session, we will look at green biorefinery concepts, an introduction to the Biorefinery Glass project, and the opportunities that prevail for Ireland and the EU. We are very fortunate to have 2 very distinguished speakers on these topics. Our first speaker is James Gaffey, MTU. James is coordinator of Glass Biorefinery, and aside from doing a great job on managing the Glass Biorefinery project, he is co-director and principal investigator of the Circular Bioeconomy Research Group, CircBio, at MTU. James is also principal investigator on the BBI-JU ICT Biochain and Bioswitch projects. He's academic collaborator in the SFI Bioorbic Research Centre and part of the Farm Zero C team. James joined MTU in 2016, working as biorefinery specialist on the EU Horizon 2020 Agri for Valor project. Prior to this, James worked in the biorefinery industry since 2009 with Sustainable Biopolymers, Cellulac Limited, and the Technology Centre for Biorefining and Bioenergy at NUI Galway. James is going to speak about introduction to the Biorefinery Glass project, what is green biorefining, and what is the opportunity for Ireland. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Enda, and good morning, everyone. So as Enda said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to the project and what the opportunities are for Ireland through green biorefining. Just a quick mention to say that our project has been funded by Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine under the EIP Agri initiative. And we have 5 partners. It's coordinated by Munster Technological University, formerly IT Tralee, the Carbery Group on the dairy farmer side, Grassa BV, a technology provider from the Netherlands, University College Dublin, through the team at UCD Lyons Farm, and the Barry Row Co-op, who are part of the West Cork Co-ops, but also a major supplier of animal nutrition in the southwest of Ireland. So next slide, please, Emily. So because people are coming from different backgrounds, I said I'd give a bit of introduction to the area of biorefining and green biorefinery. So this is a green biorefining demonstration project. Biorefinery is defined by IEA Task 42 as the sustainable processing of biomass into a spectrum of marketable bio-based products comprising food, feed, chemicals, materials, and bioenergy. And it's about using integrated sustainable processing to try and use each component of biomass at its highest value using sustainable technologies. Green biorefining is a particular subset within the whole area of biorefineries, primarily focusing on green or grassland biomass, although can include other green protein-rich materials, things like waste vegetables, plant leaves, and so on. And one of the main focuses is on the extraction of protein, but there's also a focus on different technical products like chemicals and fibers that can be extracted or produced as well as the integrated production of bioenergy. I've put together a little map so you can see some of the main biorefinery initiatives that are going on across Europe. There's a number of initiatives in Ireland. Some of the partners who participate on the Biorefinery Glas project are also active in the Farm Zero C project, which is working to develop a net zero emissions dairy farm. And aside from that, if you look across Europe, one of the main examples of where green biorefinery is taking off is in Denmark, where it's been really backed by industry and government alike as a diversification opportunity for Danish agriculture, particularly around the production of a homegrown protein to replace soybean imports. And hopefully during this webinar, you'll see what the potential for a similar approach for Irish agriculture might look like. Next slide, please, Emily. So I suppose I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the drivers behind the project, and there are definitely some key benefits around emissions in agriculture and reductions in emissions in agriculture, which Johan and Eleonora will touch on in their presentations, and also the possibility of reducing protein imports with more sustainable locally produced protein, which Eleonora and David will focus on. But I also wanted to focus on the area of the primary producer and the role that the primary producer can play in the bioeconomy, because we definitely see that small-scale biorefineries can help to improve the role of the primary producer within the developing bioeconomy. We hear a lot about the bioeconomy as being a diversification opportunity for farmers, but understanding how that could be implemented is going to be really, really important. It's important to say that a sustainable and long-lasting EU bioeconomy will require the buy-in and participation from primary producers over a long term, and this collaboration needs to have long-term commitment. And I don't think that should be taken as a given or taken for granted. If you look across Europe in some of the studies that have been carried out, among primary producers, there is still some skepticism about the opportunity that the bioeconomy will actually offer primary producers. In Austria, for example, there's been a study carried out among primary producers that indicate that primary producers actually think the bioeconomy may result in more inequity for farmers. So it's important to think about how we place the primary producer within the developing bioeconomy value chains that we're implementing across Europe. I think it's important to recognize that renewable and sustainable biomass is at the core of a sustainable bioeconomy. And the bioeconomy will only be as sustainable as the biomass that is being fed and being fueled into developing this bioeconomy. If you look at the sustainability of bio-based products, a lot of the emission benefits that come from the production of bio-based products over fossil-based products come from the fact that during the production of the biomass during the growth phase, which is overseen by the primary producer, a lot of carbon is being sequestered by the biomass that's being developed. So I think it's important to recognize the role that primary production is playing in developing this sustainable EU bioeconomy. And to that end, it's important that farmers are going to be rewarded fairly for their contribution. If we look at different methods of how the role of the primary producer could be improved in developing a bioeconomy, I go back to the Star Calibri report from 2011, which was outlining the biorefinery vision for Europe for 2030. It outlined a range of different roles that a primary producer could play in a more value-added role within the bioeconomy. Things like breeding of crops which offer bio-based properties for use in specific bio-based products, or the role of farmers, for example, in pre-processing or densification of biomass to improve the logistics of biomass, or this whole area of small-scale biorefineries are all ways in which farmers can play a more value-added role. And it's been recognized through the 2018 EU Bioeconomy Strategy update that small-scale biorefineries can play a key role in helping primary production to diversify into the bioeconomy in a more value-added role, and subsequently through the BBIJU report last year on the participation of the agriculture sector within the BBIJU program, that small-scale biorefineries can play a big role in primary producer integration within the bioeconomy. It actually called out the Biorefinery Glas as one good example of where this is happening. And just to re-emphasize the importance of this, I'm just going to quote from our former Agriculture Commissioner, Phil Hogan, who said that the bioeconomy has the potential to improve the living conditions of primary producers, our farmers and foresters, by adding additional outlets for higher value added products, as well as spurring innovation in the primary production sector. However, in order to achieve this potential, primary producers need to play a more active role in the value creation of bio-based supply chains. So this really re-emphasizes the importance of thinking about how primary producers are integrated. And that's been one of the main focuses of this project, to demonstrate how a small-scale biorefinery approach can integrate farmers, allowing farmers to produce products close to their farm. Next slide, please, Emily. And this is the technology that we've been demonstrating to essentially demonstrate this. It's a small-scale green biorefinery. It's a 2 ton per hour unit, so it's still at a prototype stage, but it's a mobile unit. So it's being demonstrated across a number of farms in the West Cork Co-op in Ireland over the summer of 2019. Essentially, we were processing for a week on each farm, and during the weekend, it was transferred to the next farm to do further processing. And the main focus of our demonstrations was, on one hand, to improve farmer knowledge about the biorefinery, to involve them in the production, the supply chain, the management of products, logistics, even some of the product trials, and ensure that they learned about the biorefinery, but in essence get feedback so that we learned more about how this could be implemented as well. And on the other hand, the focus was on producing enough volume of different products and co-products that we could actually test in different applications, and also to test the business model around this. Now, Johan will go in the next session to focus on the different products that were produced during the trials, the product streams, and you'll hear later about the trials of those products in a number of different feed trials and lab scale trials during the course of our project. Next slide, please, Emily. And so one of the big advantages to this demonstration was that we were able to test the small scale biorefinery with farmers in real world conditions. So it wasn't being something that was done away in a lab, in a very managed environment. It was being tested in a real world environment and all the challenges that go with that. But one of the big benefits as well was that it allowed us to gain a great amount of visibility for the biorefinery among the wider agriculture sector. So this was a huge benefit and wouldn't have been possible without the farmers who participated with us on the project. Next slide, please. And finally, just to say a few things about what are some of the opportunity areas for Ireland and Europe through small-scale green biorefining. I think we'll show during this seminar that it offers improved market diversification, competitiveness, and resilience. So by resilience, I mean that Ireland on a good year imports 3 million tons of animal feed annually, and on a bad year, it's much higher than that. So there's the opportunity to produce our own sustainable homegrown protein. Also, in terms of market diversification, we'll talk later about some of the different value-added products that are being produced, but one of those is non-GMO protein, which is a market growing by 12.5 billion up to 2024. We also produce a prebiotic product, which is a market of 8.5 billion by 2026. There's the opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other emissions, including ammonia, and some of the big benefits of this are around the coupling and production of low emission indigenous feed products, which are coupled with the production of bioenergy. It can be implemented at small to medium scale with comparatively low investment. So compared to, for example, some of the larger scale biorefineries that are being developed across Europe with the required investment in the hundreds of millions, you're looking at a fraction of the cost to implement a local small to medium scale system like this. So it could potentially be implemented by cooperatives and farmers as well. It's got major replication across Europe and particularly across Ireland, where we have over 50% grassland. And it also supports a bioeconomy which maximizes regional benefits. It can involve dairy farmers, can also involve beef farmers, and it can supply out to other areas of agriculture, such as poultry farming and pig farming. And while the products that are being produced do have international and European market potential, they also supply local markets, and it's built on local supply chains. So there's lots of regional benefits. So that's the introduction, and our speakers will go into more detail. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the presentations. And in the meantime, I'm going to pass you back to Enda.
Very good, James. Excellent introduction. A few questions for you there, James. Just one logistical question. Will the slides be available afterwards? I think that was the plan, wasn't it?
Yeah, the slide, it's being recorded, so that will be available, and also the slides will be available afterwards. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So Richard has a question there in relation to the market potential numbers. What is the source of this market potential numbers he's asking, James?
Well, I think that Xavier will probably go into this in more detail. They're taken from market reports. So we've done some benchmarking of these products with kind of on the market products, and we've looked at what the competing products are and what our products compare against to make some comparisons on what it could replace on the market, and it's based on market reports essentially.
Perfect. Paul Manning is asking, why only grass, James?
Well, I guess not only grass, Enda, because there is potential to process other materials as well. I suppose from an Irish point of view, it was a case of starting at what was the most commonly available feedstock, which is perennial ryegrass. But I think that's the starting point. Within the Farm Zero C project, as you know, we're looking at mixed species and clover and various other alternative sustainable grasslands as potential feedstocks for this as well. And there's also the potential for other waste materials such as green kind of crop waste, such as sugar beet leaves and other materials which could potentially be processed. But just in terms of implementing this at where we are now, and if we were to actually run with this in the morning, the focus was on focusing on what's available at the moment, which is perennial ryegrass.
Super.
That's the start point. That's the start point, not the end point.
Yeah, oh, that's well answered. Two very quick ones then, James. Eric is asking, does Ireland import 3 million tons of proteins or protein-rich raw materials?
Yeah, it would be protein-rich raw materials. That would be, yeah.
That's there. Very good. And last one, is it prebiotics for people or animals, James, in relation to the FOSS?
Potentially both, and Abby will go into that in more detail during his presentation, but potentially both, probably starting with animals, but potential to reach into the human market as well. Super,
super. Well done, James. Okay, we're going to go into our second presentation. So our second speaker, Johan Sanders, is, I think it's fair to say, is a stalwart of the bioeconomy scene. Johan got his PhD in molecular biology at the University of Amsterdam. He has worked for 25 years in the fermentation and potato starch industry, working as a researcher, R&D director of food research, and a general R&D director. He then became professor for the bio-based economy at Wageningen University, where he served for 14 years. He now works for his own company, Sanovations, to initiate various novel developments such as Grassa and Biosis, a company that strips ammonia on an industrial scale and researches projects to produce polyesters and low-cost sugars. Johan is going to speak about how green biorefinery can help EU and Ireland become more sustainable. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. In the next few decades, we have to solve quite a lot of problems in agriculture. We have come to the limits of the use of arable land, and 2/3 of that land is already used for animal feed production. When we want to feed 10 billion people in 2050 in this world, with the 50 grams that they require per day, and if we do that with the efficiency of today's European agriculture, we will need 3 times the amount that our world can cope with. In Europe already, we have passed that limit of 3 times. And in the Netherlands and in Ireland, we are also above that. So protein supply will become scarce, and we have to come with quite a lot of radical improvements. Lower the amount of nitrogen in agriculture, increase protein and nitrogen use efficiency, and also increase the revenues per hectare and for farmers. Next slide. Can we use land that is unsuitable for food crops also for the production of animal feed crops? When we use legumes, we will have a much higher fertilization efficiency as compared to grass, where we have already a loss of 40% at least, while with using legumes, the loss will be limited to about 5%. When we use biorefining for all kinds of leaves, of green leaves, we will improve the digestibility and also the feed conversion, and we will also be able to redistribute proteins to those animals and human beings that can best have the advantage of it. And also, of course, economically, they can benefit. And by biorefining, all cells of grass will be opened, and there will be no losses when you do ensiling. Next slide, please. When we look to the left European map, we see the nitrogen balance. That means that we use a lot more input in the blue zones as compared to the nitrogen that we harvest from those hectares. And as you can see, the Netherlands is one of the champions, but also Ireland is in the higher areas. On the right side map, we see where grass is grown at the moment on the best way. And there again, those countries that have a lot of rain, probably also because of that land is not very suitable for arable crops. There's a lot of grass being produced. In the next slide, you see that we can now produce 4 different products. The first product that we produce is an ensiled fiber protein press cake that has a protein that is beneficial for cows because it has a higher proportion of resistance of that protein in cows. The non-resistant protein, so the protein that is broken down in the rumen, is the soluble protein, and we isolate that and feed it to pigs and to poultry. David will show you that later. The third product is the prebiotic. It is a fructose oligosaccharide, a combination of several fructose molecules together. And it can be used for pigs and poultry, but of course, in the end, also for human beings. And finally, we can produce an organic fertilizer concentrate. In the next slide, you see a simple diagram of our process. The grass is being washed. Then we go to an extrusion system and we ensile the press cake. The juice is used to isolate the protein that is dried. And you see also the other products that remain from this process. In the next slide, you can see some photos of the products and the intermediate products. On the very left is dewatered protein that later will be dried. On the right bottom side, you can see that. Then you see the press cake, the green as it is, the extrusion equipment. On the bottom, you see how the press cake ends up from the extrusion system. And then you see 2 different membrane systems, which we use to isolate the fructose oligosaccharide, and which we also use to concentrate the minerals. On the next slide, you see our history in the Grassa company. We started in 2014 with an equipment that you can see here. It was very heavy and very sensitive to things like stone and metal pieces. So we decided to improve our process, and on the left bottom you see a first of that results. It was a small one. We built that for Uganda, but the third generation on the top right, that actually was mobile. It is in a truck. It has been in Ireland last summer, and that was our third generation. Now we have our fourth generation. It is producing 4 tons per hour of fresh grass and the 4 products. And here you see a photograph from the air. It is has become quite some complicated. It is movable, but not as easy as you have seen the one on top of the third generation. On the next slide, you see the sustainability issues. We need less land, and we can use marginal land. Also, there will be a lot less ammonia and phosphate emissions. And when we compare the greenhouse gas emission with Brazilian soy protein, we need or we produce 75% less greenhouse gases. In principle, if we use 25 million hectares of European grassland, we can compensate for all 20 million tons of soy imports. The protein that we produce is non-GMO. Payback times will be about 3 years for 8 tons per hour. It will increase rural employability with about 100,000 FTE per million hectare of grassland being processed. Marginal lands I mentioned already, and in principle, Ireland can become a net exporter of protein products and prebiotics. In the next slide, we see an outlook for the far future, and that we can reach about 3 times better nitrogen use efficiency that is required to feed all 10 billion people. For that aim to be reached, we need to combine 3 different developments. One is the use of legumes and biorefine the leaves of those legumes. Biorefining already mentioned. And the pigs and the poultry and the cows, they still will produce manure, and there will be quite a lot of nitrogen in the manure. And when we do the stripping, so that we get the ammonia separated from the manure, then we can reach 45% of nitrogen use efficiency that you see in the bottom right, as compared to the 16% which it is now with the traditional grazing. In my last slide, you see the conclusions. Biorefining of grass will increase animal protein production by about 50% per hectare. Biorefining of leaves can substitute all soy and can make Ireland a net protein exporter. Biorefining will lead to increased rural employability and increased agricultural incomes. Thank you for your attention.
Very good, Johan. Excellent. Very thought-provoking presentation. The questions are flying in. Okay, so we're not going to get through them all, I guess, because we've got to be conscious of time, but we'll just take 2 or 3, and I see Bridget has actually answered 1 or 2 as well. So first question there, Johan, is what about protein for human feed? What are the bottlenecks and opportunities? That's from Richard.
In principle, there are no bottlenecks. On the nutritious level, it will be as good for humans as for pigs and poultry. The problem is that the quality should be very constant, and that we have to pass European regulation. And that will take 3 years and quite a lot of money.
Very good. Super. Richard, another question. The mobile truck is fueled by diesel, wasn't it, Johan?
The mobile truck was 2 tons per hour of process, and it was producing 2 products.
And he's asking how was it fueled? It was fueled by diesel, wasn't it?
Yeah, at that time it was fueled with diesel. In the future, and also Xavier will go into that, we will use biogas and renewable energy for that.
Yeah. So Eric was asking, what is the capacity of the 3rd generation? That was the machine in in Ireland. That was 2 tons, Johan?
2 tons per hour of fresh grass.
Yeah, and then James later asks, are you developing a machine that can handle 8 tons per hour?
Yes, we will develop that shortly in next year.
Super. So look, I think we've got most of those answered. If there isn't anything answered, we'll get to them, guys. But in the interest of time, we're going to move it on. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Emily, for the next session.
Yeah, thanks very much, Enda. Yes, we're moving on to session 2 now, chaired by Bridget Lynch. Bridget is a research officer at Teagasc and is formerly of UCD Lyons Farm. So Bridget will be chairing the session on biorefinery glass product analysis results.
Thank you, Emily. And a lot of the questions are coming in on the products. So hopefully this session will help to, I guess, give our listeners and attendees some information on the products and answer some of those questions. So we have 4 presentations in this session. So Eleonora Sear from UCD is going to give us a presentation on the pressed cake silage. David Walsh is going to give us a presentation on the protein concentrate incorporated in pig feed. And Abe Menon is going to give us an update on the prebiotic potential of the fructooligosaccharides that was produced from the Green Biorefinery. And Aoife Feeney is going to give us an update on the bioenergy and biofertilizer potential of the whey product. So we're going to start with Eleonora Sear, and this is work that I was involved in, comparing green biorefinery pressed cake as a replacement feed for silage, grass silage in cows. Eleonora worked on her master's program as part of this project and was based at UCD Lyons Farm. So Eleonora, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Bridget. Good morning, everyone. So today I'm presenting the work done in UCD Lyons Farm as part of the Biorefinery Glas project, comparing green biorefinery pressed cake as a replacement feed for silage in cows.
Sorry, Eleonora, there's a little bit of interference on your microphone. Just not sure if you can quickly solve that.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, sorry. No, we can't hear you now, Eleonora.
Hear me now?
Go again.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Sorry about it. Next slide, Emily, please. An animal feeding study was conducted in UCD Lyons Farm from December 2019 to February 2020, using 30 autumn calving early lactation Holstein Friesian dairy cows selected from the commercial herd. The cows were at the start of the study were at an average of 70 days in milk and were producing an average of 31 kilo dry matter of milk per day at 4.3% fat and 3.7% protein. At the beginning of the study, the cows were balanced into 2 groups that matched the 2 dietary treatments, grass silage GS and pressed cake PC. The study ran for 77 days with 14 days of acclimatization period during which the cows got used to the new diet and 63 days of experimental period. During the experimental period, sample of the dietary treatments were collected daily to measure the daily dry matter intake of the cows. Milk samples were collected once a week to measure milk production and composition. Rumen fluid samples were collected once a week to measure the rumen fermentation parameters as pH, ammonia concentration, and volatile fatty acid concentration. And feed, milk, urine, and feces samples were collected for 5 consecutive days to assess the nitrogen and phosphorus balance. Following the animal feeding study, an in vitro study using the rumen simulation technique, or RUSITEC, was conducted on the same 2 diets from the animal feeding study, GC and PC. The in vitro study ran for 18 days with 10 days of acclimatization period and 8 days of experimental period. Samples were collected to measure the in vitro apparent digestibility, in vitro fermentation parameters, pH, ammonia concentration, and volatile fatty acid concentration, and in vitro total gas and methane production. Next slide, please. The experimental treatment were formulated with the direct replacement of 2/3 of the grass silage with press cake silage. The grass silage treatment, GC, consisted on 14 kilos dry matter of grass silage, 7.2 kilos dry matter of concentrate, standard 18% crude protein, and 0.44 kilos dry matter of soybean meal. The press cake treatment consisted on 5 kilos dry matter of grass silage, 9 kilos dry matter of press cake silage, and same amount of standard concentrate and soybean meal. The experimental treatments were formulated to meet the requirements of the cows and were not balanced for any nutritional value to don't have any problem on results with the results. The treatments were offered to the cows once a day as partial TMR, and half of the concentrate was offered to the cows during the milking in the morning and in the evening milking. The main differences between treatments were on dry matter, crude protein, and NDF concentration. The grass silage treatment was 41% dry matter, 18% crude protein, and 37% NDF, while the press cake treatment was higher in dry matter, 48%, lower in crude protein, 15%, and higher in NDF content, 56%. Next slide, please. Additionally to the two studies described, we ran a second in vitro study using the rumen simulation technique, incubation for dietetic treatments with 4 inclusion levels of press cake silage in the diet. The press cake PC0 was 100% grass silage, PC25 was 75% grass silage and 25% press cake silage, PC50 was 50% grass silage and 50% press cake silage, and PC75 was 25% grass silage and 75% press cake silage. This study ran simultaneously to the preview in vitro study. So it ran for the same 18 days of incubation with 10 days of acclimatization period and 8 days of experimental period. During the experimental period, samples were collected to measure in vitro apparent digestibility, in vitro fermentation parameters, and in vitro total gas and methane production. The Rusitech apparatus allow to simulate the rumen function and characteristic, controlling temperature, movement, and constant supply of artificial saliva to the vessel, shortening the time of experiment compared to using in vivo animals. Next slide, please. Results from the animal feeding study and the in vitro study are presented in the next slide. In the animal feeding study, the dry matter intake of the cows was lower for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group. Cows fed the press cake treatment at 18 kilo dry matter of intake per day compared to the grass silage group that had 19.33 kilos dry matter per day, while feed efficiency didn't change between the two treatments. Next slide, please. Milk quality and protein didn't differ between the two groups. while the milk fat was lower for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group, 1.17 kilos per day compared to 1.27 kilo per day in the grass silage. Milk solids also tended to be lower for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group. Milk quality didn't change between the two treatments, while the urea concentration was lower for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group, and the energy corrected milk was also lower for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group. Next slide, please. Other findings from the animal feeding study were a reduction in rumen ammonia concentration for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group, an increase in nitrogen excretion in milk for cows fed the press cake treatment compared to the grass silage treatment, a reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus excretion for the press cake group compared to the grass silage group, and an increase in nitrogen use efficiency for cows fed the press cake treatment compared to the grass silage treatment. Next slide, Emily, please. From the in vitro study, we saw reduction in apparent digestibility for the press cake treatment compared to the grass silage treatment, a reduction in rumen ammonia concentration, and in total gas and methane production for the press cake treatment compared to a grass silage treatment. Next slide. In conclusion, the press cake silage can act as a partial replacement of grass silage in the diet of early lactation dairy cows without a negative impact on milk yield and milk quality. Reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus excretion and in vitro total gas and methane production also indicates that press cake silage has the potential to partially replace grass silage in the diet of dairy cows with beneficial effects on the environment. Thank you for the attention. In the next slide, there are my contacts if you have more questions, but I'll try to answer to the question in the box.
Thanks, Eleonora. Maybe just a quick question came in there. If we look at just the press cake and the grass silage as standalone feed sources, what was the difference in protein on average between the two that you used for the trial?
So the grass silage only was 16% crude protein, and the press cake was an average of 10% crude protein. And just to add, the press cake were made in 5 different farms, so they had a really different composition because of different stage of grass used to make them. So during the diet formulation, we had to mix bales of press cake silage from different farms to have a constant crude protein level.
Okay, thanks, Eleonora. Just to make the point that the grass silage that we used in the trial was made on the research farm and was made, I guess, in ideal timing with regards to quality and quantity of grass silage, first cut grass silage. The press cake was delayed in when it was harvested from when it was planned. So the grass that was harvested for processing was more mature than what we would have liked, and so the protein was lower and fiber and dry matter higher as a result. Okay, Eleonora can answer any more questions come to chat, so we're just going to move on to our second presentation. So David Walsh is an agri-advisor with Barry Road Co-op, and David's going to give us a presentation comparing green biorefinery protein concentrate co-product as an indigenous feed source for pigs. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Bridget. So as Bridget mentioned, I'm just going to discuss where we included a grass protein concentrate into the pig feed and compared it to a standard pig feed. So next slide, please. So just the introduction, I suppose. Biorefinery Co-op, it's based in West Cork and it's a farmer-owned agri-business. We purchase milk and grain from shareholders. We also manufacture animal feed stuff for both ruminant and monogastric digestive systems. suppose this trial, we decided to run it with pigs, so it was a monogastric digestive system we were working with, and we got the biorefinery protein supplied to us, and we basically included it in a ration, and there was a local pig farmer, Cathal O'Donovan, who kindly facilitated a trial. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I suppose the first table here was the grass protein samples compared to other protein samples. So I suppose basically soya was the big one that we were looking to replace. And as you can see, the grass protein concentrate came back quite high in crude protein, 33.9%. And also down along, it was relatively, I know it was a bit less protein than soya, but it was relatively matching it in, we'll say, amino acids, and crude fiber was slightly high as well. So I suppose comparing that with the grass protein juice, which is just underneath it at the table, the grass protein juice, although it actually came back tested relatively well, the dry matter is very low. So the juice is only 6% dry matter versus the grass pellets, which we used, was 90% dry matter. And the grass juice was, I suppose it just wouldn't work it didn't work as well in a ration mix as the grass pellets did. So the second table then we have was, I suppose, it's the two diets we used. So it was weaner pigs we decided to use it on. And I suppose the grass protein diet, we had 30% less, we 30% less soya, and we 31.8% less barley in the trial diet versus our control diet. And again, the reason for that was the protein pellets, they came back, they tested high in protein, and also they had good energy levels, so we were able to take out the soy and the barley at that rate for our trial diet. And the amino acid profile were the same on both diets as well. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I suppose the trial conditions, there was 54 weaner pigs on the trial diet. We had 55 pigs on the control diet. The average age of the weaners were 54 days. And there was no deaths from either group over the trial period. And I suppose the trial lasted 31 days. Obviously, we'd have liked to have gone on longer with the trial. I suppose the couple of conditions were, first of all, we just got just over 3 tons of the grass protein concentrate, which was only enough to last, we'll say, for the 31-day period. And also, after that 31-day period, the weaners are being put onto a new diet, a weaner 2 diet, and basically we wouldn't have, we'd have to have made up a new diet to continue on the trial for another month. So, yeah, and just there, the average start weights were between 19.5 and 20.5 kilos across the board. So, next slide, please. Yeah, so the results and conclusions, I suppose. So it took 5 to 6 days for the pigs' intake on the trial diet to match the control diet. And again, noted by our pig farmer, that's not unusual, as there was a big change in the diet. And it took the pigs that amount of time to increase intake levels. That would be traditionally common enough. I suppose after 1 week, the intake levels increased, and as did the average daily gain. As you can see there, after 15 days, the average daily gain on the table versus the trial versus the control, it was slightly higher in the trial after 15 days. And at the end of the trial, it was a nice bit higher. It was 0.1 of a kilo higher at the end of the trial. And the intake levels also increased. So in the midway point of the trial, your intake levels, they were relatively similar. I suppose the trial diet was slightly higher after 15 days. And then again, at the end, they were higher again. They were just over 0.1 of a kilo higher. And yeah, the only other observations then was that the dungs and the pigs in the trial diet, they were slightly looser throughout the 31-day period. And they were very green in color, which would be, when there was over 30% of the grass protein in the concentrate, that was expected. And yeah, just to conclude, the trial diet performed slightly better over the 31 days in the control diet. And so we were actually very happy with the results we got from it. And that's everything. And yeah, I can answer questions in the chat there as well. Thanks, Bridget.
Super, thanks, David. Really interesting results there. Lots of promise. There's a question in the chat just on the drying process. So Johan, you might answer that, and we might move on to the next presentation. And David, you can keep an eye on questions that come in. So our next presentation is from Amy Menon from MTU. So Abby is a bioeconomy researcher and is going to give us a presentation titled Assessing the Prebiotic Potential of Fructooligosaccharides Green Biorefinery Co-product. So Abby, you can start your presentation.
Thanks, Bridget. Good morning, everyone. So the topic for my presentation is basically throwing light into the work we've done with the fructooligosaccharides, which is a green biorefinery co-product. And this work was done in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Rajiv Ravindran here at MTU. Next slide, please. So what exactly are prebiotics? We all are well versed with the term probiotics, which are health beneficial bacteria that help in a plethora of various health benefits, and prebiotics are the feeds that the probiotic bacteria thrive on. So that being said, fructooligosaccharides is a gold standard among the prebiotic market. And in Europe, fructooligosaccharides are largely marketed. Looking at the economic part of things, in 2020 alone, there was a market size of nearly 2,700 million USD for fructooligosaccharides, or FOSS as we'd like to call it. And a compound annual growth of nearly 5% is estimated between the period of 2021 to 2026, which looks like a quite lucrative business option for various businesses to take up. Moving over to the next slide, this is basically a flow diagram which encompasses the various unit operations we performed here at MTU to produce FOSS-enriched permeates. So the central image showing the brown juice is basically the grass whey that we obtained from the biorefining process after the green proteins have been extracted, which was presented to you by David on the fig tree trial. So the brown juice were then reduced in volume to about 1/3 using a rotary evaporator. And we had then subject the samples to several purification methods, namely centrifugation and ultrafiltration, which basically helped us get permeates of FOSS-enriched extracts of degrees of polymerization, DPs of less than 25. And the byproducts obtained from these purification methods, namely the solid pellets from the centrifugation process and the retentates from the ultrafiltration, were recombined and analyzed for their biomethane potential analysis for their prospects to be used as a fertilizer, or the feed for AD would be further discussed in the upcoming presentations. And the analysis that we've done here with regards to the fructooligosaccharides were basically looking into the prebiotic indices, and we quantified the FOSS samples using a high performance liquid chromatography. Flicking over to the next slide, please. So the first part, as I mentioned, was analyzing the prebiotic index. The prebiotic index is basically a metric which shows the growth performance or the efficacy of a probiotic, or which is shown, which are the 5 strains shown in italics in the table here. And we had using grass FOSS as the sole sugar source and selectively growing these bacteria in grass FOSS. We benchmarked these samples against commercially available fructooligosaccharides and inulin. And from the results, we see that all the values showed a positive number, which shows a positive results, a great result where all the probiotic bacteria showed affinity to grow in the grass FOSS. And interestingly, our results showed comparable, the grass FOSS PI, or the prebiotic index, were quite comparable to that of commercial FOSS. So this basically substantiates our hypothesis of FOSS-enriched way to have prebiotic activity, and could be pitched in as an animal feed prebiotic as such. We further characterized our samples or quantified the short chain, the number of short chain FOSS fragments that was present in our solution, and we benchmarked them against nistose, fructofuranil nistose, and 2-kestoses, where we found the overall concentration of our phos enriched whey to contain to about 4.65 gram per liter, which is quite a significant number. So in a nutshell, this is the results that we obtained with regards to the phos work, and I'd be happy to answer any one of your questions via the chat function. Thanks. Back to you, Bridget.
Okay, thank you for that. Really exciting, I guess, when we see the potential compared to the commercial phos and the inulin commercial products. So yeah, if you keep an eye on the chat, Abby, some questions might come through now as people process your presentation. So to finish this session, Aoife Feeney, who is a farm sustainability manager with Carberry, and she is going to give us a presentation titled Assessing the Bioenergy and Biofertilizer Potential of Green Biorefinery Whey. So Aoife.
Thank you, Bridget. So I suppose the final co-product in the biorefining process is the grass whey. So we've trialed this by analysing the potential of using it for bioenergy and biofertilizer. The next slide, please, Emily. So we looked at the potential of the grass whey and the press cake to produce bioenergy through anaerobic digestion. Because the biorefinery plant has heat and energy requirements, there is potential to use the residual streams to produce the energy required by the plant. So the table on the bottom right-hand side of this slide, I suppose, shows the biogas potential and the biochemical methane potential of the DPHOS whey and the press cake compared to unrefined grass silage. So for the purposes of this, we focused on the fresh weight figures on the right hand side of the table, and these show us that I suppose the whey has lower biogas and lower biomethane potential than the unrefined grass silage on a fresh weight basis. However, there is, I suppose, a shorter residence time of just a few days, which means that the heat demand for the biorefinery plant could be met sooner using the residual streams from the biorefining process. So these results, I suppose, also showed that the press cake is quite comparable to the unrefined grass silage on a fresh weight basis. So I suppose overall the trial has shown that there is great potential to produce bioenergy from the biorefined press cake and from the grass whey, particularly maybe on farms where there might be less focus on producing cattle feed for intensive production. So I suppose the images on the slide also, on the left-hand side, you can see there's an image of what the DPHOS whey looked like at the end of the biorefining process, and the press cake also, which was quite high in dry matter as well on the left of that slide. So next slide, please, Emily. So then we looked at the potential, I suppose, of the grass whey as a biofertilizer. So the grass whey is high in nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium, and has the potential to work well as a fertilizer for grassland systems and possibly other systems as well. So I suppose the graph on the bottom left of the slide shows the theoretical potential of the grass whey as a fertilizer. And you can see there it is quite comparable to slurry. So I suppose the figures for slurry were taken from Chagas, and the figures for the grass whey were given to us by Grasa at the start of the project. So this was really to give us an idea of how we could carry out a trial at farm level for comparing the two. So you can see that the Grasa figures there show that there was quite a bit of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium available in the grass whey. So it was quite promising from the outset. So I suppose the trial was carried out by our participating farmers pictured on the slide here. And they carried out the trial, I suppose, alongside a control plot and then a plot that either received slurry or soiled water, depending on the farm. And this was spread using low emission slurry spreading technology, and they were spread at 30 meters cubed per hectare was the rate in which it was spread on 3 farms. So you can see here the results are split into 3 farms on the bottom left. So we've got farm A, B, and C. So if we take the figures for farm A, I suppose the way we analysed the response was through grass measurements over a 4 to 6 week period. So grass measurements were taken on the control plot, on the plot that received slurry, and then on the plot that received grass whey. So straight away you can see that there was a definite response to the grass whey in terms of grass growth compared to the control plot. Now the growth figures on farm A, I suppose, are slightly lower than farm B and C, And this is mostly just because of the delay that Bridget mentioned at the start, that there was a delay in grass being cut and refined through the process. So it took a little bit longer for this ground to recover because it was gone quite stemmy. But overall, we can see that there was a definitive response, and there wasn't a massive difference, I suppose, in growth between the slurry paddock and the whey paddock. The second two farms then spread soiled water on one plot, and then they spread the grass whey on the other plot. And you can actually see from both of these farms, there's very little difference between the whey and the soiled water that was spread. So I suppose this really is telling us that there's definitely nutrients available in the grass whey, and that grass is responding. There's a good growth response when it's spread. Some of the information, I suppose, that we got back from the biogas potential studies showed that the grass whey can be unstable. It can be quite acidic, so that suggests that it would need to be spread straight away after being produced. And that is what happened, I suppose, in the case of these three farms as well. It was spread immediately after production. But there is potential then, I suppose, to stabilize the grass whey and make it less acidic through anaerobic digestion. So from the first slide I presented, at the end of that process, we're still going to have, I suppose, a residual stream that will have NP and K available, and this could then be spread as a biofertilizer on the land afterwards. So that's the end of my presentation, so I can take any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Aoife. So in the interest of time, I'm going to bring this session to a close. I guess across the board, really encouraging results for all products at a quick look, and I'm sure there's plans to further develop and improve those products into the future. So Emily, I'm going to pass back to you.
Thanks very much, Bridget. Yeah, we move on to session 3 now, chaired by Helena McMahon. Helena is the head of department of STEM here at Munster Technological University and is the co-director of the Circular Bioeconomy Research Group. So Helena will chair the session on business model, finance policy recommendations and knowledge exchange.
Thanks, Emily. Morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm delighted to chair this session. So we've heard a lot of fantastic outcomes around the different products and the potential applications of those in the areas of feed and the market opportunities associated with them. And we've heard, I suppose, really interesting pieces around the biorefinery technology. But the big question really is, how does this stack up from a business perspective? So we've some really nice presentations coming that are going to, I suppose, speak to that. So we'll have Xavier Dubson, who will speak about the business case. Brita O'dwyer of MTU will speak about finance and ecosystem supports. And then finally, Enda will come back in to speak about the knowledge sharing and dissemination of the results of Biorefinery Glas. So first off, we have Xavier Dubson. So Xavier is the CEO of XD Consulting and is an engineer in sustainable energy. And I really like the mission statement that Xavier has put forward for XD Consulting. So it's our mission is to empower people, organizations and communities in making the transition to a low carbon and resilient future, which I think fits really nicely with the Biorefinery Glas project. So I'm going to hand over now to Xavier.
Thank you very much, Helena. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So as you've mentioned, we're consulting engineers specialized in sustainable energy, and over the last 2-3 years, we have done a lot of work around anaerobic digestion, and in that context, extending this work to look at the biorefinery project was very interesting in that we're looking at both the energy dimension of it as well as the, let's say, circular economy, all of that based on a very important feedstock here in Ireland being fresh grass. We're based in West Cork, so the local focus of the project was also very interesting for us. The objectives of our contribution to the project were to conduct a techno-economic analysis of, let's say, a case study project to evaluate the viability of the Graz biorefinery. The second step was to assess the potential for diversification for farmers offered by the biorefinery, and then to recommend suitable business models for the uptake and wider replication. So next slide, please. So when it comes to the case study, we looked at the next generation of plants. So we're doubling the capacity from I think it was the fourth generation presented by Johan in their latest development. That plant would be stationary. And in our case study, we looked at a study area here, which is in West Cork in the southwest of Ireland. Given the size of the plant, it's envisaged that it would be collocated with an existing, let's say, industrial site or where, let's say, cattle feed processing could take place, or where food processing and in particular milk processing could take place. Because I think there are really interesting synergies there, both in terms of energy supply and consumption, as well as logistics and in terms of feedstocks and product distribution. So then can we move on to the next slide, please? So we looked at the whole process and tried to map it out in terms of material flows, in terms of energy flows, and then in terms of cash flows. And we looked at a number of scenarios. There were two main pathways we looked at. One was where we focused on the production of two main products. One is the protein concentrate, and the other one was the enzyme protein fiber, the press cake. And then we looked at the second pathway where we're looking at in addition to the two previous products, we're looking at the production of FOS as a concentrate and a prebiotic supplement, primarily in animal feed. So in terms of, let's say, the value chain and the supply of feedstock, the requirement for the plant, as I said, is 8 tons of fresh grass per hour, actually not per day, and that would require the provision of fresh grass over a period of 210 days to 10 days, which is what we consider is feasible on an average basis to harvest fresh grass with machinery like zero grazers. And then for the balance, we're looking at 70 days where we're supplying the plant with silage as a feedstock. Out of that process, we can produce enough protein to feed 25% of the poultry within West Cork, or 5% of the pigs that are reared in West Cork. So it's already, with one plant, a very significant contribution to the animal feed requirement of the study area. And when it comes to the press cake, the plant would produce enough to feed about 2,200 dairy cows on an annual basis, and that would be equivalent to about 12% of the dairy cows herd in the study area. And when it comes to the FOS, as a prebiotic supplement, there'd be enough to feed or to contribute to the nutrient requirements of 600,000 layers. Again, a significant fraction of the bird population in poultry farms in the study area. So then we looked at, let's say, the logistics to supply the feedstock, which is very important in terms of integration within the agricultural system that's already in place, and to understand how would it balance between producing those high value products and feeding cattle and cows, generally speaking. And we estimated that the land bank requirement to meet the grass requirements as a feedstock would be in the region of 500 to 600 hectares per year at the yield level of between 12 and 14 tons of dry matter per hectare. That kind of yield bracket would be considered relatively high, and that reflects the fairly intensive dairy farming of the study area. So then when we look at, if we have a plant at a given location, how far do we need to go to get the required fresh grass and silage, and how much of the, let's say, the availability of the feedstock would be required and would then substitute existing uses. And we can see that as we go further and further, the level of substitution from current uses would drop quite dramatically. So within a radius of 9 kilometers, for example, the level of substitution is down to 3 to 4%. So the overall message here is that given the ability to transport grass over reasonable distances, the biorefinery process doesn't have necessarily to compete with the existing grass use. And then in effect, there's also room for improving yields to provide the extra fresh grass or silage requirement to meet the biorefinery plant. And that, effectively, if you look at a study area the size of West Cork, you could envisage a collection of local plants operating in conjunction with existing co-ops, for example, or processing plants. Next slide, please. Then we looked at two other pathways or complementary pathways. One is looking at the integration of the biorefinery with an anaerobic digestion system, and the other one is a standalone biorefinery plant where the energy requirements are met with a gas boiler for heat and the electricity grid for the power requirement of the plant. And both of those energy requirements are quite substantial. I think there was a question earlier around how much energy is required per ton of fresh grass processed, and our assumption is that the requirement is 35 kilowatt hours per in terms of electricity per ton of fresh grass, and 55 in terms of heat. So then the option of using anaerobic digestion and using the biogas to produce heat and power and feed that into the biorefinery became an obvious option to consider. And we mapped that out and built that into a model to explore the different options from a cash flow point of view, and obviously underlying that a energy and mass balance point of view. So if I can move on to the next slide. So the cash flow analysis for the four pathways I've mentioned is presented and summarized here in the table. And if we look at the pathway number one, where we have a combination of biorefinery and with an AD plant and the production of two products, i.e. the protein concentrate and the protein fiber, and the second pathway where we have those two products, but we are only the biorefinery standalone plant. And then the third pathway is where, again, we've the biorefinery integrated with an AD plant, but we're producing three products. So the FOS in addition to the protein concentrate and the protein fiber. And the fourth pathway is similar, but without the integration with an AD plant. And if you look at the bottom line, shall we say, of the four pathways, you can see that we really need the production of that third product, the FOS, to generate enough revenue to make the project, let's say, viable and with a positive cash flow. And also that the energy requirements are substantial enough that the integration of an AD plant works out nicely and has quite an impact on the bottom line from a return on capital as well. So, and then we did the sensitivity analysis of the different pathways, and in that context, we found that the key factors that are affecting the profitability of the project are the cost of the feedstocks in the first place. So how much the plant is paying for the grass and the silage that's supplied to it. And in that context, our initial assumption was that it would be in the region of 150 euro per ton of dry matter for the silage and 70 euros per ton of fresh grass, and that's per dry matter ton that's supplied to the plant, and that 70 euro is only for the fresh grass on the stand. So effectively that would be what a farmer would be paid, and a contractor would then come and harvest the grass and bring it to the plant. And when we varied that, we saw that we really need to decrease very substantially the cost of the feedstocks from that kind of benchmark values to achieve a positive return on investment and cash flow across all the pathways. The price of the product is obviously also an important aspect of the viability of the project, and in that context, we looked at the cost of the inside fiber of 42 euros per ton of fresh matter, which is about 20% above the cost of silage, and that's on the basis of higher nutritional value of the press cake when produced in ideal conditions. And then the energy cost, as I said, the energy is a substantial aspect of this, and therefore, you know, it needs to be looked at carefully. It's about 20% of the overall operation and maintenance cost of the plant without AD, and 10% with AD. So I think there is scope there in terms of improving energy efficiency, in particular looking at heat recovery throughout the process from you know, within the biorefinery, in the subsequent treatment of some of the products for drying in particular. The capital investment is substantial, but it's not that of a critical factor in the cash flow analysis, and really in terms of viability, focus has to be on the feedstocks and the products. So then, can I have the next slide, please? Great. So then we looked at the diversification potential for farmers to engage in the biorefinery project. And in that context, the farmers has to play a very important role. He is the primary producer of the feedstock for the plant. And there is a lot of scope for farmers coming together and creating a business around the biorefinery project, or you know, I think there is a natural fit with existing co-ops also within the study area and all across Ireland. You know, essentially I could visualize a biorefinery plant in every co-op across the country where we have a very substantial amount of grass being grown, as you've heard before. So then we looked at how does it compare to existing farming enterprises, and what was quite striking to me is that if you look at the different farming systems across Ireland, dairy farming, again, a fairly substantial part of the agricultural activity in the region, is generally quite profitable and a viable enterprise. But if you look at bee farming, it's quite a more radical picture in terms of viability. About 40% of cattle farms are not viable, they're vulnerable, and a lot of the bee farmers need to increase the family farm income by working outside of the farm, and only a small number of cattle farms are viable. If we look across the country, you know, in the southern regions, about 43% of farms are viable. And again, that's because there's quite a substantial amount of dairy farming going on here, but radically different in northern and western counties of Ireland, where the viability of farms is down to 18%. What that tells me is that there's a lot of scope and appetite across the country for alternative farming models. And in that context, if we compare the potential to generate revenues from producing grass for biorefining against existing enterprise, and in particular bee farming, we see that we can generate a family income of about 20,000 euro per year per labor unit, which is above the threshold of viability, or what's considered viable for a farm, and is substantially above what bee farmers would be making. So that, I find, is a very promising opportunity, and I think one that's going to drive a lot of demand for the biorefinery as a project. I also feel that, you know, as an innovative technology, it will be typically driven by the early adopters, but you know, there is a substantial opportunity for replication, not just in the southwest, but across Ireland. So I think that if maybe the next slide. I think that's it for me. So I look forward to seeing your questions and to answer them. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks for that, Xavier. Absolutely fascinating presentation, showing the variety of the products and the impact on the business case, ultimately, of the number of products that come out of the biorefinery. So we do have a question, Xavier, relating to the scale up of option 1. So this relates to the comment that you made that around the potential to provide 25% of the feed requirement for poultry in West Cork.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is the cost of scale up.
So we didn't look at scaling up from let's say the case study plant we looked at. I think, considering the nature of the agricultural system in the area, I would see more scope for replication. We have at that scale, it's probably cost effective, as we've seen, and if we can refine the model and make it more productive and more energy efficient, etc., then I would see a number of similar plants across the region rather than significantly increasing the scale. I think it will be horses for courses, but at 8 tons, it's already quite a big machine, and the energy requirements are substantial. So just as a reference, the AD plant we've considered as part of the model would be in the region of 500 kilowatt electrical equivalent. So it's already quite a substantial enterprise, and finding the right place for it let's say embedding it within the community could be more problematic if we go with bigger plants.
Okay, there's just one more question before we move on. I am conscious of time. So there's a question here, and it said, would the replacing of grass with hemp not create more value for the primary producer by introducing hemp as a rotational crop?
I'd love that to be tested. Actually, I wouldn't be in a position to answer on that question. It's one I wanted to ask myself, so I'm delighted to see that maybe Joanne and James could consider that. And I noticed one question earlier about using the grass fiber as a building material, and I think that would be a fantastic outcome. And there's a ready-made market for hemp fiber as a construction material for insulation in particular.
Okay, so look, there are lots of questions coming in. We'll answer those in the chat as we go along. So keep the questions coming, and thank you for those who have submitted. But we will move on now, and thanks again, Xavier, to the next presentation. So I would like to introduce Brita O'Dwyer. So Brita O'Dwyer is the head of SEED, which is the Centre for Entrepreneurship and Enterprise Development, and she's also a senior lecturer in entrepreneurship, leadership, and regional development. And Brita really has an amazing track record in working with startups and scale-ups regionally in the Southwest and also nationally. And I'm going to hand over to Brita now.
Great, Helena, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be at the stage of the business case and taking on that positive news that Xavier shared with you. So a lot of options. I guess at this stage, it's important to know that it's in its infancy, so the options have yet to be decided and how best they suit different groups of farmers or individual farmers for that matter. But if we could just look at the next slide, and I guess take the context whereby funding is like everything. A lot of opportunity has been presented. How do we drive this on now? So from a European perspective, as we see in the next slide, indicates whereby, excuse me, there is significant, I suppose, traction being given. There's a lot of attention being given, and there's a lot of money being put into opportunity to support the development in this area. So we look at, for example, at Europe, we have the European Circular Bioeconomy Fund, which has dedicated 250 million to this area, focusing specifically on things like technology transfer, looking at different types of business angel investment, how we can assess those, how we can engage venture capitalists. Again, for a lot of people in the farming industry, those kind of partnerships are new diversifications. They're not typical partnerships that would have happened in the past, but they do offer opportunities. Also, I suppose from the area, then we look at the European Investment Bank. Again, 1.6 billion has been set aside for the agro and the bioeconomy. What's happening here? We've got the opportunity of loans. We've got the opportunity again of the venture capitalist associations. However, what we do find in this is that gaining a loan from the European Investment Bank is quite a significant, almost symbol of achievement, because it goes through a very rigorous process, well worth achieving, and it does have its own gold standard. And I think Carberry are testimony to that. So we also have other options in Horizon, and these are, as you know, similar to the projects we've gone through. They're time consuming in the sense that they don't give immediate answers, but they are deep research at the cutting edge, and they provide significant partnerships and networking as we move forward. So their involvement in that is quite significant, as we're seeing from this particular project itself. And there's a funding there of 100 billion to 2027. So a lot of opportunities coming from Europe. In terms of moving on next at a national level, I suppose in the next slide, we're looking at the side of whereby the corporate and the investment banks, as we know them, they are very much moving into dedicating a resource to this area. They're putting the whole sustainable financing on their key agendas and investing in advice and support in that, which is good to have that dedicated expertise available to us. From a point of view of the whole area of green funds, and where we're finding groups of people coming together now with that dedicated money, with a group of investors who are driven in this area, interested in seeing this area grow, who are there to offer advice, perhaps take some sharing. But again, there's opportunity being presented in that space as well. Different business models, I appreciate that. These are offering new solutions, but they're definitely worth considering. From a bonding finance perspective, we're seeing energy supports there, some of the ESB ones. And again, as Xavier said, there's an energy intensive issue to consider in some of the options that have been discussed to date. Equally, for people wondering, will I, won't I, should I, could I? There's opportunities through Enterprise Ireland. Again, I may hear people say, I'm not in that market, but that's also available through the local enterprise office, whereby you can apply for funding just to actually find out for 15,000, 25,000 to see, is this possible? And if that were to be considered amongst a group of farmers, then again, the output there could be quite significant, which is also there with the EPA Green and Enterprising Fund, with a lot of, I suppose what's there really is expertise in terms of teasing out the ideas more than hard cash available to us. And finally, then they're equally so in the Sustained Enterprise Fund. And we're moving on then to the next slide, whereby if we have this available to us at a European and national level, which is wonderful to see, but I suppose the caution here is when you see activity, a lot of these people want to invest, however, they're being quite cautious. They're being cautious because they're not seeing the returns in other projects. So the more we see of the development and examples of what's happening in this project, the better, because it'll gain trust, it'll gain confidence in the market, and we'll start to see a much greater rollout of funding. And that therefore looks at the business model innovation. And we're very conscious that for a lot of people online today in farming community, this will be not just diversification from the point of view of what's happening with the land, but also from the point of view of engaging in a different type of market. So what do we have to look at that? There is a mindset change that's going on. The green, the circular, the sustainability is definitely out there, it's gaining momentum. But what is from the point of view, next slide, is that we're looking here whereby the options that are there is, yes, we can do this on our own as a farmer, self-funded. There's grant supports out there. There are loaning options out there. There's a possibility of bringing investment into your community, into your farm, or there's the area of sharing equity. So the options that are there are quite numerous to be considered. There certainly is no one size fits all. Xavier spoke there about the different co-ops and in integrating that into the existing co-ops. Maybe that's a low-hanging fruit. Maybe that's certainly something that could be considered, and people on board may go that as the easiest source of information and as an easy option. It's not an easy option per se, but a more realistic option, shall I say. From a business model perspective, again, if the land is big enough and the farm is big enough, perhaps on your own, in partnership or in the cooperative. Or we have yet to explore even more novel models than that, and we can talk about that later. So finally, then, I guess it's just for each farmer to reflect on what level of diversity would you like to get involved in? What level of change are you willing to get involved in? And then in terms of the risk management, what's the risk of going down this route if you are going to go into, again, the other production, whether you're going to do that or you're going to partner up and let someone take on the actual product development and distribution. So from the next step perspective, if I can look at the next slide, I'd like to introduce you to our colleague here, Katrina Power. And Katrina is the Education and Outreach Manager for the Circular Bioeconomy Cluster. You heard Helena and James are the co-directors of the Circular Bioeconomy Cluster here at MTU. So the questions today to answer in this would be very difficult to answer the different variety of questions that would come in. So our best suggestion is that please contact Katrina. Her details are there, and the answer will definitely be made available to you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Helena.
That's great, Brita. Thanks for that. I think amazing to see the variety of funds that are available. Some of them are tricky to navigate, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to come together and be creative and how they might collaborate to access those funds. So a lot to think about on that. Just I note that another fund has been highlighted in the chat around potential opportunities for funding through Ireland 2040. So we'll make sure that everybody is made aware of that after the event. So thank you, Brita. So I'm just want to highlight one event here that's on the slide. So there, the Circular Bioeconomy Cluster Southwest is holding an event on the 10th of March, and there will be a speaker at that event from the European Circular Bioeconomy Fund that Brita highlighted in her presentation. So it might be a good opportunity to hear more about that fund and to get involved in the Q&A with the representative from that fund on March 10th. So we'll move on now to our final speaker in this session. So I'd like to reintroduce Enda Buckley of Carberry, and Enda is going to talk about knowledge sharing and dissemination in Biorefinery Glas. So over to you, Enda.
Thanks very much, Helena. Next slide there, please, Emily. And maybe just to say at the outset, I think the project is fair to say hasn't suffered from visibility, and I think that's largely down to James. But I guess if we just look at our kind of major objectives at the start, one was to support wider dissemination between farmers and beyond, and the second was that farmer-to-farmer bioeconomy communication and dissemination. So I guess one of the first things that happened was there was a website developed, and I would really encourage anyone that has an interest in biorefining or the bioeconomy, check out the website. It's a really good resource. So it's biorefineryglas.eu. There's 9 different sections in there, including updates, work plan, documents, etc. It's a fantastic resource. It's definitely worth checking out. And you can see there as well, we highlight digital storytelling. And really what that entailed was the participating farmers giving their own take and their own perspective on the biorefinery when they visited their farms. And again, really good resource. There's 6 different stories. They're in the website. Would strongly encourage people to have a look at them, because they each have their own take, and I suppose the journey the farmers went on. And those workshops were done by Wombat Media. So next slide, please, Emily. So further dissemination activities. So as we know from the project, the biorefinery visited 5 farms in West Cork, and it was in Shannock farm for 2 weeks, over 2 weeks. And there was a demonstration day, a national demonstration day held in the midst of that Shannock trial. And there was over 300 people attended that event in July 2019. Really good event held in collaboration with Teagasc at Shannock. I suppose another feature was the project was in the RTE's Big Week on the Farm series in September 2019. So that was a nice kind of highlight. I should add as well, there's a really good video made of the project, and that's within the website. You know, it's a 3-minute video which kind of encapsulates, I suppose, what the project is about. The project was presented at the Department of Agriculture's tent at the National Ploughing Championships in 2019 by James and Bridget. Biorefinery Glas and small-scale biorefining was also presented at a workshop in Bucharest by James in October 2019. And the project was presented at the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre's 6th annual conference in Glasgow on the 5th of February last year by James. So, and you can see a picture of James down there in the bottom right. That picture in the top left is the National Demonstration Day at Shannock. Next slide, please, Emily. So I guess just other features. The project is featured in the Department of Agriculture's Ag Climatized consultation document. So that's the department's roadmap for decarbonisation for the next out to 2030 and beyond. EIP Agri have newsletters, so there's regular features on the Biorefinery Glas project within that. The Farmers Journal did a very nice feature on the project by Tommy Miles. That's two years ago now, I guess. And KPMG Agribusiness Report also featured the project last year. The Biorefinery Glas was presented at the GoGrass EU Green Biorefinery event last year. And I suppose our dissemination and knowledge exchange activities are kind of culminating this week. So this is actually our third workshop this week. We had our first workshop with the participating farmers on Monday. We then had another cohort of Carberry farmers where we did the workshop on Tuesday, and today, I guess, is the kind of the big workshop for the wider public and interested people. And that's really the dissemination workshops, and that's the end of my presentation, Emily.
Thank you very much, and we'll move on now to the closing of the session. We're on to James Gaffey for the roundup of the main project findings and the next steps.
Thanks, Emily. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I guess just to kind of, because I know it's a lot of information to take in and we've been through all the projects and the business case, so just to kind of recap on what I think are some of the main findings of the project. I think we've shown that the biorefining process can improve the resource efficiency of Irish grass, providing potential diversification opportunities as well as some feed independence through production of homegrown protein. We've shown that all 4 co-product streams compared very well with incumbent product alternatives that we were looking at and offer
Has James frozen for everyone else? Hello?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hello? If James isn't back, I would perhaps hand back to Enda to round up the session, if that's okay.
Okay, will we give him another 10, 15 seconds?
Okay,
Emily?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I can certainly endeavour to finalise it.
Just give James is going to try and come back on.
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank.
That would happen. That would happen. Anyway, so I was just yeah, I'm just going to recap just on some of the main things. I think the 4 products that we examined through the project compared very well with the incumbent products, which is really great because typically grass just gets fed to a cow. The fact that you can feed the cows and potentially produce 3 additional co-products and co-product streams is a really amazing outcome for this. The fact that we've shown that bioeconomy can be delivered at small to medium scale economically with the production of 3 products, and that additional product in the fructooligosaccharides prebiotic has been a major outcome, I think, as well from the project. And I think we've shown that by our demonstration, farmers and primary producers can and should play a more central role in bioeconomy value chains. Next slide, please, Emily. In terms of some of the ongoing and future developments, I think Biorefinery Glas was the first green biorefinery demonstration project in Ireland. I've mentioned the Farm Zero C project, which is funded through SFI and on which a number of us, the Biorefinery Glas team, collaborate on. The project is led by Biorefinery and the Carberry Group and UCD, but also MTU ourselves, as well as Grasa, participate in that demonstration focus on the production of a net zero emissions dairy farm, which also integrates the idea of a green biorefinery. The Farm for More project is a silage-based system that's under investigation by UCD. There's the European Go Grass initiative, and on the small scale biorefinery area, Grasa and MTU are collaborating this September on a new H2020 initiative of small scale biorefining in the Bio for Africa project. So a lot of ongoing and future initiatives in this space. So this isn't the end of the road. It's really the beginning, I think, of starting to demonstrate more of these types of initiatives. Next slide, please, Emily. I think we've done this project in 2 years, from the demonstration to the testing of products and the testing of the business model. I think I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to do that. I think it would have been a big achievement in any normal 2 years. But the fact that we've managed to do that with the pandemic going on, which hasn't helped, has been a testament to the team that's involved in delivering this. So I want to say a big thank you to all our team. From Carberry, a big thanks in particular to Enda, and also Aoife, Orla and John. From UCD, a big thanks to Bridget, Karina, Eleonora and Megan. From Grasa, a big thanks to Johan, Bram and Roy. From Barry Rowe, a big thanks to David and Scott. And at MTU, I've been lucky to have the support of Helena, Brita, Abby, Rajiv, Ozan and Foncia. And a big thanks as well to Emily, who has facilitated and helped us to deliver these workshops so well this week. So thanks to Emily as well. Next slide, please. And a special thanks to our farmers who have helped us to demonstrate this. Wouldn't have been possible without them, in terms of the long hours that they put in during the demonstration, in terms of their advice in implementing this, and in terms of helping us to create visibility and credibility among the farming sector. So a big thanks to all of the farmers. I don't have a picture of Tim and Shane McCarthy and Declan Murphy, but thanks to them, thanks to Vanessa, to Kevin, to Michael and Michael. All of those are on the dairy side, and a big thanks to Cahill, who was our pig farmer who hosted our dry protein concentrate pig feed trial. So thanks to all of you. Next slide, please. Thanks to our supporters. The project is funded by Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine through the EIP Agri initiative. So a big thanks for all the support in the development of this project. We're one of 23 EIP Agri projects which support a bottom-up approach to resolving key challenges in the agriculture sector through collaborations between farmers, researchers and industry, policymakers and other stakeholders. So you can check out the other EIP Agri projects at the National Rural Network website. And a big thanks to National Rural Network and Irish Rural Link, who've been big supporters of ours in terms of disseminating the project results. Next slide, please. And finally, you can keep in touch through the project website. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be uploading the different projects results. We've got a couple of results that are going for peer-reviewed publication as well. So we'll be updating all the results there. This webinar has also been recorded, so will be made available. And I know a question came in about the slides, which will be made available to all the attendees after this. We've had on average, I think, it's dropped a little bit now, between about 120 and 140 for the webinar, and it's been pretty consistent. So big thanks to everyone. It shows the amount of interest, I think, that there is in the project. So a really big thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll send an email out afterwards. And if you have additional questions, you can get in touch with the team. But a big thanks to all our speakers, and thanks to you for attending. And yeah, so thanks for coming, and we'll see you later.